Much for joining us for part 2 of the Leadership Toledo's Community Leadership Series. We are here today with Sara Best with the second half of her presentation on leadership. It's not what you think it is. We are so thankful to have the support of First Energy Foundation to make this community leadership series possible at no cost. So please make sure to spread the word as you, if you like what you see here, because we have a great lineup continuing, which we'll kind of touch on it at the end of the session here. But let's hop right to it. So I'm going to introduce Sara again in case we have some new people here who weren't able to make it last week. But Sara Best is a people and team development champion with over 25 years of experience serving global, national, and regional organizations of all sizes and scope in both the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Sara believes strong leadership creates the powerful change needed to make a better world. Sara is a certified practitioner of the Predictive Index, a certified emotional intelligence assessment administrator, as well as an experienced emotional intelligence performance team and executive coach. She holds a bachelor's degree in social work from The Ohio State University and a master's degree in administration from Eastern Michigan University. So she's really a underachiever here. Sara is also a 2008 Leadership Toledo alum. She's a former board member, and she is the principal and co-founder of Real Good Ventures. So Sara, thank you so much for joining us again. We are excited to hear what you have to say, and I will pass the buck over to you. For everyone who is tuning in, when you use the chat feature for any questions or for interactivity, just make sure that you select the panelists and attendees, and I will make sure to field any questions that you have to Sara. But yeah, you'll want to click the panelists and attendees in the chat feature, and we will make sure that you get everything that you need and get all your questions answered. So Sara, take it away.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be with you again this week, and excited to launch into what I think is critical for each one of us in the time that we're living in. These skills and abilities of emotional intelligence are helpful not only to our work, but to our life as well. Just want to start by saying you do not have to have attended last week's session to benefit from this week's session. So even though it's 2 parts, it's not required. A couple of people asked that question. And today, alongside the team at Leadership Toledo of Anna, Nikki, and Elizabeth, Rockstar team, I also have a co-pilot today, John Brower. We together formed Real Good Ventures about a month and a half ago. We launched our talent optimization consultancy, and it's great to have John with us as well today. So as we dig in, responding to the great feedback that came from last week's session, wanted to make sure you had in your hands something you could use to work with the information that we're going to cover today. So hopefully most of you received in advance of today's session this handout. It's to be printed, and if you happen to have a pair of scissors close by, you can actually cut these into little cards, because we're actually going to use the cards when we walk through the definitions. But even if you don't have the opportunity to cut them, as long as you print these cards and have them in front of you in your workspace today, it'll allow you the opportunity to kind of dig in and have an individual experience, around these competencies of emotional intelligence. So I believe we are throwing that PDF in the chat feature for you, and we may have to do it again in a little bit. So
I'll try that right now.
Okay, thank you. And we did talk about leadership last week. We talked about the secret of leadership is something that maybe we don't often think about. But it occurred to me, since we met last week, that leadership isn't just about boosting performance or getting the best results out of our team. It's also about dealing with a pandemic and increased anxiety and tons of stress and worry and chronic fear and a lot of very unusual, never before experienced circumstances. So we asked the question last week, are you a leader? And about 97% of you said yes. And I think in times like this, we must remember, we can remember that we have the opportunity to own and take leadership of our own well-being. Sometimes that's the best way we can lead others effectively, is by managing what's happening within ourselves. So under normal circumstances, EQ and emotional intelligence would be critical to the success of a lot of different things. but even more so now. We did also talk last week about, what good leadership is not. And we defined some healthy and strong leadership in terms of, what people provide for us when we've experienced good leadership. So we did a little reflection on that. But what we kind of came down to, and this came directly out of the chat feed from our session last week, is really the secret to leadership. As I see it, and I think sometimes as others see it, it's humility. And humility is the opportunity to have a more modest view of ourselves. It's about being what we termed the right size, not so small, not so unappreciative or unhappy with our characteristics, nor too big, so confident, overconfident in our abilities that we discount the input of others. So humility, which has a million different definitions. It's often referred to even in the Bible. It's about being the right size, whereby we can appreciate the things that we do well. We can really cling to and sort of lift up our strengths, but not ruminate on the things that we don't do so well. And maybe even become more accepting of the unique way in which we're designed. And being the right size means there's room for us and there's room for other people. I think one of the other things that happens when we're not the right size is we don't show our true potential. We don't gift to the world those things that are our true capabilities. We hinder our light. So it's important. And we would say it's an inside job. Leadership and humility both start from the inside out. So the big question last week was, well, how do we develop humility? Some of us are predisposed to not be very humble. For example, I can use myself as an example. In behavioral drives, I have very high dominance, kind of controlling, like to be independent, like to call the shots, and I have a strong need for social acceptance. So kind of the nature of me doesn't necessarily show up with humility or as a humble person, but the skills and abilities that we're going to talk about today are one way to help us adapt and fine tune in that area. So we talked about the medium and the mechanism for becoming more humble and developing the sense of humility as self-awareness. And it's a critical sought after skill and ability for any leader, but it's also something that leverages all the other skills and abilities we have. We just have to grow this muscle. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. We will refer briefly back to these reference profiles in the world of the predictive index, which happens to be one of the behavioral analytic or one of the tools that we use in our practice. We talked about these reference profiles being groupings or families of characteristics, behavioral qualities, behavioral drives, and how they kind of define us and help us understand each other a little bit better. We also talked about your individual leadership style. There were 4, pretty definitive categories: exploring, producing, stabilizing, cultivating. I won't go all the way back through those, but in each of these 4 areas, there are some distinct behavioral drives and qualities that are, left to their own devices, are powerful and their strengths, and they help us get where we need to go. Yet at the same time, they can become a liability. For example, high degrees of dominance, where we're forward facing, we like a big challenge. We'll see that up here in the exploring quadrant. Persuaders, captains, mavericks tend to be sort of forward facing, fast moving, and like to get things done, maybe like to throw out the rule book as they go along. Over here versus cultivating, for example. The cultivating patterns, the collaborator, the promoter, these are the individuals that focus more on the pulse and the relationship with others and making decisions together with and through people. So we identified those leadership styles and how they're unique, but also how they require some adaptation at times. And we talked about, we don't like the word change. We don't want people to change. And we don't want you to change who you are, but we all know that to work effectively together, we need to adapt. We need to find ways to tweak and maybe pivot and turn a little bit in situations and scenarios where we want to get a better result. So it's about adapting. So we're going to talk about some of the ways in which we do that. I came across this saying too: characters live to be noticed. People with character notice how they live. And I couldn't help but think of myself. And as I referred to earlier, high dominance, high extroversion. I think for most of my life, I was, definitely pushing myself out in front of the crowd. And I obviously still do that today to some degree, but unaware of the impact that might have on other people. So characters live to be noticed. And, as a little kid, not having any inhibitions and worries about what I might be doing and how that might affect other people. But as I mature and grow, recognizing that, noticing how I am and noticing what I do and what that does to other people, that creates character, because it means that I'm aware of the impact I have on people. And I can see that, gosh, when I say things this way, or when I approach a work this way, it doesn't really get good results. It shuts another person down, for example, the way I say things. So I loved Nancy Mosier's quote here, because it helps me kind of figure out how to be the right size. So we're talking today about emotional intelligence. And this elusive term, emotional intelligence, is pretty common today. It's only really about 20 or so years old. Although social intelligence and the way we learn, different than just IQ, has been studied for centuries, this concept of emotional intelligence came about in the late 1990s, really. And it's about how we perceive and express our emotions. I would say it's how we deal with the demands and pressures of life. Some have called it our street smarts, or how we deploy our IQ. So it's a unique set of skills and abilities that help us regulate not only our own emotions, but have influence over the emotions and the motivations of other people. And I think it's critically important today that we recognize, hey, we've never been in this time before. So today's exercise for each of you, I hope, will yield some information and maybe a priority of which of these emotional intelligence skills would create some great momentum for you, or kind of assist in some of the areas that you may find yourself struggling. And we're all struggling right now. There's no doubt about it. So emotional intelligence is indeed how we adapt. We have these natural behavioral drives. Those of us who have no patience whatsoever, we just want to go and get there, and we can see the end result, like, let's get moving. We don't have to stop and wait for bureaucracy or hoops or details. Those kind of things require some impulse control and some emotional self-awareness. We can dial in that patience or dial up that patience when we use the muscles of emotional intelligence. So is this important to leadership? You bet it is. I was told a long time ago that the fish rots from the head down. And it's kind of an extreme and dramatic way for us to recognize that the higher you go in an organization, the more responsibility you have over people, the more essential emotional intelligence becomes. Leadership and our ability to work with others, it's about a tone. It's about setting a tone. And if that tone is not resonant with people, if it's not positive or productive, and it doesn't mean, by the way, we don't have conflict, but if there's not trust and respect, we know that tone creates an environment that becomes very toxic. So it's essential at the leadership level. So I'm going to highlight our PDF handout again right here, because we're going to go into the definitions of emotional intelligence with your eye on which ones you think are most important to you. So if hopefully that's in the chat feature, and we'll move forward from here. So here's what I'd like you to do. We're actually going to go through the quick definitions and even some tips around these 15 competencies of emotional intelligence. And as we review them, and as you hear the definition and think about it, I want you to be putting these cards, or identifying, if you haven't cut them up, identify in order of priority, which ones are most important to you. And you'll be able to tell, for example, when we talk about flexibility, flexibility may be a little bit lower on your list of priorities, although probably for all of us right now, it's a pretty important one, because we don't know from day to day what's going to be happening in a lot of scenarios. But you have to be thinking about, in your life and in your work, which of these rises sort of to the top of your list as most important. So as you hear the definition, place those cards in order of importance to you, and feel free to move them around and work with them, because at the end, we're going to kind of take a look and see what you have. Okay. And I'm hoping that if there are any questions or concerns, we'll just put those into the chat feature. So first, we're going to talk about self-regard. And, you know, the simple definition here, yes?
We have one question.
Yes.
Order these as how you currently apply these, or how you would like to apply them in the future.
Ooh, good question. Let's go with the aspirational version, how you would like to apply them. Because what I think we're getting after is you thinking about what's most important for you to focus on now. So it's not exactly how it is, but how you'd like it to be. Thank you for that clarification. Good question. Anything else?
Not right now.
Okay, awesome. So the first competency is self-regard. It's kind of interchangeable with self-esteem. Some people call it self-confidence, but it's really about how comfortable you are in your own bag of skin. You know, with what you have that's great, knowing what you have that isn't so great, and being okay with that. Working to a place where you have a sense of confidence that even under challenge or pressure, you're still going to be able to be successful. So that's what we mean by self-regard. And I would say a couple quick things. And by the way, we're giving you these slides today. So hopefully, you know, you don't feel the need to jot lots of things down. You'll have these right for your, right for your own benefit. You know, following people that have overcome their issues with self-regard, listening to their stories, understanding and appreciating, even in extreme cases, how people have come to accept, you know, their greatness and also their mistakes. So I think following some experts, we have local experts too, by the way. Diana Patton is one. There's numerous people that have shared, openly shared their stories, and now are working to, to the benefit of others. Work to become the right size. So self-regard is in fact not being too big or too small. Far and above, I see people who are too small inside, or that's their experience. So where are you? You know, what size are you? And how is that preventing you from letting your light shine, from you finding success and fulfillment in your work? And then last but not least, when people give you a compliment, just say thank you. It's difficult. And for some of our reference profiles, the operator, the craftsman, people that are lower in dominance and more collaborative, it's really about the we, not I. But we have to learn to just accept and appreciate those things that are valuable to other people. So that's my challenge, is to just say thank you. Self-actualization. So I would say we think of self-actualization as the willingness to pursue growth and to become, the best person you can be. It's about learning, growing, evolving as a person. Why is this important? Well, we find that people who are not feeling very self-actualized, they become unhappy, unfulfilled, anxious, angry, depressed, resentful. So there's an opportunity for each of us to expand, how we see the world, what skills we have. We can put new tools in our toolbox. But the reality is, this is something that we can measure, and it's essential for our functionality. It also has to do with whether we find meaning in our work. So I've come across people who have very low self-actualization, but they may have several degrees and certificates and lots of accomplishments. Mostly it's because they don't feel connected, or they don't find value or meaning in what they're doing. So self-actualization would kind of be a gauge of our satisfaction with where we are in our life at this point. So if you're feeling antsy or a bit edgy about, gosh, I'm just not there yet, well, it might be time to figure out in which way or direction should I grow? Should I learn a new skill? Should I join a group, for example? So a couple of things to help us here. What is motivating you right now? Some of us are so busy, and so, especially in the crisis, we're so, in gear and in mode that we don't take time to really think about, what is the push from behind? What's moving us to do those things? And sometimes we're not motivated at all. So we need to find something that is more valuable to us and more meaningful to us. I think another opportunity would be instead of maybe having a very large or long-term big picture goal, to be able to break that down. And I think I remember being younger in my career and needing some help with this. So, pursuing additional degrees, moving from an entry-level position to a high-level leadership position, there could be a lot of unhappiness if we notice the gap between where we are now and where we'd like to be. So one way to bring that a little bit more into realistic picture is to chunk down those goals and make them a little more bite-sized. So what new skill or ability or experience would be good for me? So for some of us, it is an experience. Like maybe we need to serve or volunteer or just give of our time in a way we haven't done so before to really tap into purpose and meaning. It's essential. Okay, so that's self-actualization, emotional self-awareness. And I hope I spoke at a pretty fast clip last week. I'm hoping that you're noticing I'm slowing down a little bit and hopefully giving you some time to reflect and use your sort cards and place these in order of importance. So, here's the linchpin right here. This would be, I think for a couple of decades, we've called this the cornerstone of EQ. It is about self-awareness, but emotional self-awareness. It's identifying and understanding your own emotions, not only being able to label them, but understanding the subtleties between them. This is where a feeling vocabulary list comes in handy. In fact, I can throw one in our handouts that we share after the session today. I often refer to an emotional vocabulary list because it's not just about being mad, sad, angry, or glad, or unhappy or elated. It's a lot of nuanced things in between there. So it helps us to identify those more unique emotions. And as we expand our vocabulary, then we have a better understanding of the depth and the complexity of the emotions that we feel. And by the way, we feel emotions all the time. We can't escape it. You can't put your feelings in a box and put them on the shelf. Like when you go into the office or when you turn on your Zoom meeting. It's really about coordinating the emotions with the thoughts that we have all day, because they do happen simultaneously. So emotional self-awareness is really something we can all perfect and continue to grow our muscle in. So label your emotions and notice when they change and why did they change. That's important. Openly discuss your feelings, especially those that are more reflective of the fear and anxiety we may have. So for some of our reference profiles, this is not natural to our design. So people that are higher in extroversion, promoters, persuaders, captains, people that have more propensity to work with and through people, we think out loud this way. And some of you with like the craftsman, the operator, the specialist, the strategist, the controller, the venturer, you have more of an internal thought process. And so being able to discuss those feelings and share those feelings with others might present a challenge. Even focusing on those might be difficult too. So learn your triggers. I think that's the last and most important tip here with emotional self-awareness is figure out where you get activated. And when I say activated, I mean upset and frustrated. What are the things that happen and what are the things that are happening when you experience the most intense emotion? That gives us data and information we can use to begin to manage those emotions. And speaking of emotions, I know we share that they happen all the time. Just to give you a little picture of what's happening in our brains. Here in the front of our brain, we call this the prefrontal cortex. This is where all the thought process happens. And at the rear of our brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain, is housed the emotional or the limbic brain, the limbic system. So our thoughts and our emotions are happening all the time. When stimulus comes into the brain, it gets dispersed. The data goes first to the thoughts and then split seconds later to the emotions, and they interact. Emotional intelligence could be really defined as having more intentional pathways between our thoughts and our emotions. But thoughts and emotions, as we become aware of them, then we get to manage them more effectively. Right now, in the time that we're living in, scientists and neurologists and psychiatrists are sharing that there is an overabundance of activity happening here in what's called the amygdala. So this is the part of our brain where emotional trigger happens. We used to refer to outbursts and great upset when people kind of flip out. We call that an amygdala hijacking, where emotions just took over, fight or flight kicks in, and pretty soon we're acting or speaking in a very irrational, upsetting way. So there's a lot happening because of the stimulus that we're taking in, the bad news, the data, the information about the pandemic, the social unrest. So it's something to be aware of, that there's a lot happening, and therefore these activities that you may choose to engage with today as a result of our discussion today may in fact be what really keeps your brain healthy and sustains you through a very difficult time. So let me tell you, in the thought process, emotions and thoughts, they happen all the time. There is something called an ant. An ant is an automatic negative thought. I'm sure some of you have heard this term before. I like things very simple. I like to be reminded of how simple it is to address some of these things. But those automatic negative thoughts, they happen. They're not necessarily the truth about me or anybody else, but it's this persistent sort of gloomy, cynical, negative way that we view things, and it's automatic. In other words, we didn't plan for that, and nor would we want anyone necessarily to know we're thinking those things. So just to normalize, the ants happen. They're like, the picnic. They just come to the picnic because the food is there. So you can't blame the ants for coming to the picnic because that's where the food is. In our mind, what we need to be able to do is kill the ants, like squash the ants right away, and replace them with more effective, more beneficial, and more productive thoughts. And this just takes practice. There's a lot of reasons, why we have there are a lot of different ways the ants show up. So for our benefit today, John's going to throw into the chat feature, it's a 2-part handout. It's called Kill the Ants, part 1 and part 2. And it's just a quick reflection and a little bit of guidance that all of us could really use to begin to replace and really squash out and replace those negative thoughts.
Hey, Sarah, I'm having a little trouble getting them into the chat feature, but I'll work on it.
Okay, perfect. Well, and we can also include them in the handout. It's really simple. It just requires, 5 or 10 minutes of your time, and then it's an exercise you can repeat. Emotional expression. So we're moving through these competencies here. This is openly expressing one's feelings verbally and non-verbally. So I always appreciate and admire how sometimes, I'll ask someone how they're doing and they'll say, I'm fine. But their body, their face, their posture, their hands would indicate something very, very different. So emotional expression is really getting good at articulating and demonstrating in a healthy way how you feel. So you can imagine that this is contingent upon our ability to be self-aware. We have to know what emotions we're feeling and whether or not they're presentable. We have to manage those emotions. But emotional expression, if nothing else, is just being able to say what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So again, we'll refer back to the reference profiles. Some of us are just very natural at doing this. Others of us, it just doesn't occur to us that these are thoughts or ideas or feelings that we should speak out loud. So it requires a little bit of skill and repetition for us to get comfortable and remember to do this. Because for those of us that are more quiet and more introspective, reflective, analytical, when we don't share some of that emotional information, we disable the people around us to work effectively with us. They have to read our minds and guess. So emotional expression is huge. And per the comments I just made, some of us may have to disengage from ourselves, to be able to engage more successfully with others. Okay, so that's one little tip. Write down a few words that describe how you're feeling before you express it. So it's a good habit to get into, especially if you're concerned about how it might sound when you speak those thoughts or those feelings. So practicing those makes a lot of sense. And then identifying and managing those upsetting or distressing emotions. versus there are some of our reference profiles out there have a tendency just to kind of sit on things. Rather than rock the boat or tell that person how unhappy I am, with their performance on a particular task, I'm just going to do it myself, for example. Or, they just don't put the same care and effort into it that I would. So, I'm a little resentful, but I'm going to have to do it myself. These are things that we need to kind of begin to own and manage. All right, we're moving on. Assertiveness. Love this one. And it says here, words have weight. Oh my gosh. Take it from a person who is very adept at cutting people off at the knees with a few words. It's this thing that happens when the magical high dominance, high extroversion, low patience, and very emotional decision making happens for me. I could be all poised and articulate, and wham, there could be a one-liner that makes it very hurtful for somebody. So assertiveness requires some of us to dial in and really thoughtfully consider what we're going to say. For others of us, it means stretching out a little bit. It means being willing to rock the boat. It means being willing to say something because it's the right thing to say and risk making someone else uncomfortable for maybe the good of the team or the good of the client or the good of your child, whatever it happens to be. So this definition of assertiveness is great. It's saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and not saying it mean. Saying what you mean, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and not saying it mean. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but it requires a lot of practice. And if nothing else, maybe we could just share with people, hey, I'm working on the skill of assertiveness. I don't speak up often enough, or I speak out harshly too often. I can even be aggressive. So I'm working on that. And hopefully you'll work with me. And assertiveness allows us then the opportunity to move emotions to the side. So we need to manage and understand when assertiveness turns into aggression, it's because we're probably attached to a particular belief or a particular viewpoint. So I was thinking as I was reviewing the notes for today that in the climate that we're in currently, politically, socially, et cetera, we would do well to really get clean and clear on what our position is, and to recognize that if we're feeling unsure or uncertain on the inside, that we may be defensive when we communicate that perspective. So whatever your truth is, it's fine. It's your truth. But sometimes when we go to share our truth, we get activated because maybe we're not entirely sure it's the right truth, or we're afraid someone else is going to be stronger or their ideas will be more accepted than ours. So it's all about being the right size inside to allow us to use this skill of assertiveness. And we'll combine that with another important emotional intelligence skill in a moment. So use I statements instead of you. Assertiveness is about sharing your perspective, and we need to hear it. The world needs to hear it. Encourage respectful, open conversations. I'm 53 years old. I've been doing this stuff a long time. It is still very, very difficult. Emotions are strong. The body's response is strong. Those automatic negative thoughts, the ants. Whenever we think about challenging or negative things, that chemical reaction happens in our body. That's like a stress bath. And crazy things start to happen. Similarly, when we think good thoughts, there's a wash of neutral chemicals that kind of help settle everything down. So this is why these things are important. Test drive a tough conversation with a trusted friend. Amen, amen. That's an important thing. So independence. It's really about your ability to work on your own. It does have an element of self-directed activity. So to be independent doesn't mean, you don't work collaboratively with others. It just means that you can take action and move forward without needing the approval or the emotional okay from other people. So various degrees of independence in our reference profiles. For some of our reference profiles, there's high, strong independence. And when there's really strong independence, there's a likelihood that we may overlook other people's ideas and not really count the value that they bring because our idea might be better. On the other end of that, there's an incredible need for affirmation or fear of failure. So we don't want to get it wrong. Therefore, to take a step means we need to get some approval or ask a few questions and make sure we're on the right track. So independence is kind of right in the middle, where we can operate autonomously, we can do the work we need to do, and it's kind of based in the confidence we have in our own abilities. So this one takes some practice too. A couple of tips here: create space for others to shine. So for those of us that have super high dominance, and we tend to, be out in front, and we tend to run the show, call the shots, we have to be able to step back and let other people really do what they do best. How about looking at decisions that you've made in the past? So being able to, kind of do an autopsy on a decision that you made, probably by yourself, and whether that produced a good outcome or not, or why, or what you would change about that decision. So, developing from your learning, and maybe it wasn't a good decision or you felt like it didn't produce a good result, developing the opportunity to learn from that is incredibly important. So not feeling confident to act. So it's about giving somebody an opportunity to be a sounding board for you. Do a demo, do a test pilot. I think a lot of times too, we may think in our mind, oh, I should talk to so-and-so about this, but then we don't. We just don't pick up the phone, or we don't, make a time to walk through that. So independence is huge. Being in the middle, being the right size also comes into play here. Interpersonal relationships, going to keep right on going. This is about developing healthy, mutually satisfying relationships. And this means that there would be give and take. So it's you're getting something valuable from the other person, and you have ease in giving something of value to the other person, and you listen to each other. There's trust and respect. It's rewarding and enjoyable. So we would say interpersonal relationship. You might say, well, why is this important to leadership, or why is this important at work? Well, I think we know that we need to have successful transactions with the people around us. And when they're unsuccessful, it's very unsettling. It can stop the workflow. It can cost us a lot of money when we're not moving forward. So in the workspace, it's about having these successful, healthy interactions. We don't necessarily have control over, the other person in this equation, but in our life, we can surround ourselves with people who do know how to have healthy give and take kind of relationships. And just recognize that if your score here, if your ability here is lower, it may be because you don't have enough positive, helpful people around you. So how do we develop stronger interpersonal relationships? Lencioni would say, be vulnerable. I like to say, throw yourself under the bus, tell one on yourself, let people know about your imperfections. Say, I don't do that very well, or I'm sorry, or your idea is better than mine. It's a really humbling way, to get clean and clear and make it safe for other people. Make time to put people in your calendar is another opportunity. So for a lot of us, we're moving at a fast pace. We're shouldering the burden of a lot of different things in the course of all that's changing. But we can choose to put time in our calendar with good people. I wanted to share real quickly that in January, I think I got this exercise from one of the Inc. magazine daily posts, but it asked you to go back through your calendar of the previous year and write down all the people, literally all the people that you met with, and place them in two columns. The plus column were the people that were positive and you felt good when you thought about meeting with them. You look forward to that. On the other side were the negative names, the people that maybe they presented a challenge for you, or it felt very stressful and overwhelming, to be in their presence, or you didn't look forward to working with them. And to the best of your ability and wherever you could, to make time in your calendar early in the new year for those people that were on the positive side of the list. Start there, start with those people first. And I love that idea. I did do that, actually. It was very helpful. Laughter relieves stress and acts as a social glue. Well, I think there are a lot of things that create social glue, but certainly self-deprecating humor, not the kind of humor that leaves people out or calls out different groups of people, but the kind of humor that brings us closer together. That's what we're talking about here, interpersonal relationships. So another big hitter in emotional intelligence, This is another skill and ability that I think we're reading about and hearing a lot about, especially in this current time. But empathy has two pieces to it. It's a tactical ability. It's kind of like your third eye and ear. So you can kind of scan and see what's happening with the other person. So you can try to understand where they're coming from and then planfully direct your efforts in response. Salespeople are really good at doing this. They kind of read the person, they try to understand what's important to them, and then they position their messaging in such a way that it will resonate. So if we take the sales component out of that, we each could be doing that. I think if there was an effort and an opportunity for each one of us to capitalize on right now, it's just listening. So empathy is that ability to read, to understand, to hear what another person is saying without judging it. And that's really, we're not seeing a whole lot of that happening in the world right now. But the practice for us would be, just to seek to understand. Does not mean you have to agree with the person, but it does mean that you need to appreciate and understand that their perspective is probably very different from yours. So why would that be? What's behind that? What is the source of that? Could I seek to understand that? So empathy is about that read of another person, lacking judgment, but it's also compassion. So there is a touchy-feely component to empathy, which is where we can develop a sense of compassion for other people and for the experience they're having that may be different from ours. So it's complex. Maybe it's not as complex as we would think, but all of us need to leverage our abilities here in empathy. Seek to understand, not agree. Ask, how are you feeling, or how does that make you feel? What are your thoughts? Find the right words to relate and reassure. And I would say here, this also takes practice. What do you say to somebody whose perspective is vehemently different than yours? Or if they have a situation that they're experiencing and you've never been there, what do you say? I would say err on the side of less is better, or say nothing other than, gosh, I wish I had words. I have no words right now, but I support you. I just want to be here with you, for example. In those more contentious and challenged, dissonant kind of conversations, you can say something like, I'm really just working to understand. This is different for me. This is a new perspective for me. It's different than the way I think. I'm seeking to understand. So I think those are powerful, powerful tools to help us build empathy. Working our way down here, now we're on social responsibility. And social responsibility is about being a contributing member of society. So it's about doing things for the good of others, being comfortable doing those things, and having a sense of, gosh, there's order for a reason, and I'm a part of that order. So people that have high social responsibility tend to, really let that be their motivation, either in the community service that they do, or I remember there's a local financial firm here in Toledo, and some years ago, they did a study of their high performers using emotional intelligence. They used these competencies, and all of the people in their firm who were selling financial services took this emotional intelligence assessment, and then some analysis happened to identify, hey, in the high performers versus the low performers, what are some of those common characteristics or EQ abilities that differentiated them? And there was one, and it was social responsibility. And wouldn't you know that this particular firm made it their business, and they still do today, to be out in the community, to be financially supporting causes that show marked results. It was kind of a requirement to be on boards, to be actively volunteering together. So what made this firm and the people in this firm most successful was an alignment with that value and that ability of social responsibility. So does that mean if I don't volunteer, or I don't, I'm not doing things other than my job, and I'm putting all my money in a savings account, I'm not a good socially responsible person? Absolutely not. It's unique for each one of us. So the way we want to test that out is to check your own values. Somebody really amazing helped me work through a great values exercise to see where I was in alignment with my values and where I wasn't. So this is a place where social responsibility can thrive when we kind of just identify and get in alignment with what our values are. Do your objectives connect with the broader vision? So when I say broader vision, it could be the company's vision, it could be your family's vision or mission, it could be the organization, for which you serve as a volunteer or a board member. But, is what you're after, what you're trying to accomplish, connected to that? Or does it in some way take away from the bigger picture? That's another good question, or a test, if you will. How do I show concern for the greater community? Sometimes it's as simple as praying. Some of us just can spend time thinking good thoughts and praying. Others will choose to get active and take part in things that advocacy, volunteering, things that are important to them. So there's a lot of ways we can show concern. And this is not about judging one better than the other, but it's about making sure that you have some connection to that sense of social responsibility. Checking our time here, moving right along. I might pick up the pace just a little bit. Problem solving. So now we're kind of in the tactical abilities of emotional intelligence, and hopefully, you've got in front of you your card sort, and you've positioned some at the top, or maybe moving some over to the side in terms of what you think is most important for you. Problem solving is really about our ability to identify what's happening, design or identify potential solutions, and then work to implement those. So it's a process. I wish it could be linear. I mean, in some cases, in the work that we do, we can follow step A, step B, step C. Sometimes we have to problem solve on the fly. But in any case, it's about working toward a favorable solution by using our skills and abilities to analyze what's happening. So some of us are challenged here because we maybe don't have enough information, or we're scared to make a mistake, would be another reason. Label the emotions involved, extract information from them. So when problem solving, we have to regulate and be aware of the emotions that we're feeling and the high intensity or perhaps the low energy that may be involved. So it's about identifying and managing those emotions. Talking to a trusted peer. It's a great way to work through a process, or have them help you work through a process that maybe you don't naturally experience on your own. You could become overwhelmed very easily. Check out how others are approaching the problem. Some might say, hey, what's your competition doing? How are they solving that problem? But it's really more about what's the benchmark? What are other people out there in the world doing to really create solutions around a common problem? So problem solving is a little more tactical or technical. Along with that, reality testing comes into play. Reality testing is about being, kind of seeing things as they are right here, right now. Remember that saying that was really popular, 15, 20 years ago? It is what it is. It is what it is. And I think sometimes we find ourselves saying that even today. I might be dating myself here, but reality testing is being able to size up fairly objectively what's happening, what's needed, and maybe even identifying what does that mean for me, or what does that mean for you? So it's kind of like being right where you are. It's also not being uber focused on this is where we should be, but here's where we are. Can you believe the gap here? Or it shouldn't have happened that way. It's not fair. It's not right. Those are strong emotions that come and cloud our judgment and cloud our behavior and response. So reality testing is being able to sift through that emotion and objectively see what is. So a couple of tips. Check the perspective of someone outside the situation. And this is valuable any day of the week over any issue or concern. When we have a person who can share an alternative or a differing perspective, it's going to help change ours. It's going to help influence ours. And I was told once that, my mind is a dangerous neighborhood. If I spend too much time in there alone, I'm not necessarily going to come out with the best answer. So that's always a good exercise. Gut check, fact check equals balance emotions with data. So here I want to make a point of reference to in our behavioral wiring, there is a way in which we tend to make decisions. Some of us are more objective and logical, and things just have to make sense. Some of us, on the other hand, are very emotional or subjective, intuitive. It's about the gut. So for reality testing to be successful, we need the facts and we need the subjectivity, and we need them together to create a balance. So those of us who are highly emotional in our decision making, it just doesn't feel right. We need to balance out with a little bit of data and information and logic. And those of us who say, you know what, it doesn't stack up, it doesn't make sense, we need to consider that there's a subjective element. So it's not black and white, but there's another balancing element to that. And then last but not least, what else is clouding your judgment? So when it comes to reality testing, are there other strong emotions, past experiences, resentments toward people, fear? What could be standing in the way of your seeing things as they objectively are? Could be that you're not the right size. Okay, impulse control. Ooh, I'm watching that clock tick. This is the ability to hit the pause button before we eat, speak, purchase, you name it. I think for a good decade and a half, we've been aware in our society that impulse control is in fact the causation behind probably the most toxic health situations that we're in. I would say prior to the pandemic, you know, the things that cause heart disease, diabetes, etc. The other ills of society, many of them can be traced back to an inability to have impulse control. So hit the pause button, stop before you speak, you know, imagine or identify before you purchase or eat what's happening with you. And I think we are definitely in a world where instant gratification, things that, you know, we want to feel better. So things that allow that to happen are things that we seek for. So impulse control becomes incredibly important. And I will just share with you the Walter Mischel study that happened decades ago, or at least 30 years ago. He was a psychologist who studied impulse control in 4-year-olds, brought them into a room one at a time, and they were promised a marshmallow. And the researcher would then leave the room and say, hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow, when I come back, you can have 2. The marshmallow experiment is groundbreaking because the kids who could wait for that second marshmallow far and above outperformed the kids who couldn't wait, who just didn't have it in them. They just wanted to eat that marshmallow right now. What we need to do today is teach ourselves tactics and abilities and skills that help us wait, because you know the reward is there, but it doesn't have to happen immediately. And if we can learn that skill, it really makes us much more productive and successful. 10-second delay would be one idea. Write down your triggers. So, you know, being home for the last 6 months, I've been thinking or working a lot on how the day goes and when, in fact, I'm more likely to overindulge or misfire with my communication, overspend. So we have some themes and trends that we can observe in our life. And test drive your response to something with a trusted peer. When we can hit that pause button, like wait 24 hours before sending that email reply. Listen and then wait for 10 seconds before you actually say something back. Some of you are really good at this, by the way. Some of us, not so much. So impulse control is huge. Flexibility. Being able to shift, to bend, to pivot, to move in a different direction, you know, being able to change priorities without having a lot of maybe runway or understanding as to why we need to do that, becoming increasingly important, you know, as we deal with the uncertainty. It's just day in and day out uncertainty. We kind of think we know what's going to happen, but we're not entirely sure. So this does require flexibility. Somebody once couched it as, hey, if you're a tree, you know, if your foundation is solid, some of you really need to have that solid foundation. I need to know what to expect. But your branches, they can move and they can shift. That's what we mean by flexibility. You know, when you feel anxious about change, when you, and some of you, by the way, are predisposed to have a lot of anxiety about change, be able to talk about it with somebody. And know that your experience of flexibility and dealing with change is unique to you. So we can't judge other people or label how they deal with change. We can seek to understand what they need and better assist in that way. And I say time and reps. You know, when we're dealing with change, when flexibility is required, it just takes some time for us to begin to understand and some repetition with the material and the information. Okay, stress tolerance. Ooh, important one. It's how much you can handle before the wheels fall off your wagon. How much can you tolerate, in terms of stress and anxiety before you start to become a little unglued? And it's unique and different for each one of us. Some of us definitely could attend to this particular skill and feel a lot of relief and get some great ROI. It's important because it kind of sources all the other skills and abilities. Things like calming the mind for 5 minutes a day. If we had all day to talk about this, we'd actually even try some of these exercises. Focus on what you can control. So we can control what we consume. We do not have to watch the news. We do not have to read every article that pops up on our phone. The information and knowing that information is not necessarily going to change the outcome. So really being intentional about what you allow your body to receive and your mind to receive is so critical. And then exercise and healthy eating. It's not a new concept. A lot of us know what we're supposed to be doing, but we keep beating ourselves up by not doing it. That to me is not being the right size. Being the right size is saying, hey, you know what? It's my job to take care of myself so that I can be there for other people. Awesome. Optimism. I think we have 2 more. Believing that a challenging circumstance is temporary. So optimism is sometimes called future happiness, or our ability, our confidence in the fact that we can handle what comes our way. This one is also huge, but you know what? It can be learned. Optimism is a mindset that we can develop through practice and repetition. How do we do that? We can write down 5 things a day that we're grateful for. I think I've started and stopped this practice 100 million times in the last, 10 years or so. But every time I get back in the habit of doing it, the results are just immediately evident. There's a calm, there's a more, there's less ants happening, certainly. And I wake up with this sort of joy and elation in my heart versus dread and fear. So there's no joke about this idea of gratitude and how it physically and biologically changes our brain. And when we say optimism can be learned, we're talking about creating new pathways in the brain. That's what EQ is all about. Good, new, and grateful. So another great woman told me about starting my day, starting every meeting, starting each conversation with good, new, and grateful. What's good? What's new? What are you grateful for? Isn't that just a simple way to start a gathering, a Zoom meeting, for example? And then last but not least, we have this happiness and well-being that really is kind of a pulse or a temperature gauge for all of our other abilities and emotional intelligence. Happiness is indeed something that we're born with the ability to have, but we can also immeasurably grow our happiness by focusing on things that are really, really important. Surrounding yourself with positive people, definitely. Do a digital detox. In the resources we share after our session today, I'm going to give you a link to an article, 7 ways to reset your mind with a digital detox. We know that our work and addiction to the screen is changing our brain. So, rather than freak out about it or get, doom and gloom going on, let's just figure out how we can manage that, because we're not going to necessarily live without the screens and the digital information. And definitely get help with what I would call chronic sadness. So for some of us, we are in the zone of depression and anxiety, and it's understandable. It could be biological. I am a big proponent of outside help, a therapist, a doctor, pills and skills. When we have prolonged unhappiness, happiness that hangs on, it's not situational, then we're in a whole new zone. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. So hopefully you've had an opportunity now to sort your cards and identify which of those skills and abilities are most important for you. What are the top 3? So the 3 skills as a strength. Yeah, what are the skills that are most essential in your leadership? If you look at that list and how you position those, you've got your top 3. Maybe one is emotional self-awareness. Maybe one is interpersonal relationship. Maybe one is stress tolerance. The next question to ask yourself is, hey, is this something I'm good at? Or is this something I could learn and develop myself some more skill? And if so, by the way, would your boss agree that those 3 skills are the most important skills? Or would your spouse or significant other agree? Would your teenagers agree that these are important and that you're good or not good at them? Be good to get a little reality check on those things. It's an exercise. Happy to, you're going to have our email information. Happy to follow up with anybody who'd like to discuss more. We covered a lot of ground. We have one closing poll before we go. And just to let you know, there will be an EQ resources list sent out to you. It'll talk about the books, the apps, the podcasts, the TED Talks that are pertinent to EQ. There's a Kill the Ants handout and also 7 ways to reset your mind. So with that, Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you to launch our closing poll.
Yes, Sarah, thank you so much. So many good things. I was like furiously scrambling around with my cards. So yes, we're launching a poll here. We want to know if you'd be interested in a follow-up session on the predictive index, emotional intelligence, and leadership, both or none. There's no wrong answer. All of that stuff that Sarah was just talking about, we will make sure that gets sent out in the follow-up email. And Sarah, if you wouldn't mind stopping your screen share, and Nikki's going to throw up the other one, and we're going to put our eval in the link here as well. But this was all wonderful. So if you check in the chat, Nikki just posted the eval in there. So if you wouldn't mind doing that. And then next up on March, oh my gosh, on September 30th, we have Max Lambden. He will be our next Community Leadership Series presenter, and he will be talking about the unwrapped leader. So just a brief summary can be found on the Community Leadership Series website. So I'm going to throw that Eventbrite in there because we'd love to see you all there. That will also be over the lunchtime hour. So make sure to sign up for that. And if you have any questions for us at Leadership Toledo, feel free to reach out. My email is anna@leadershiptoledo.org. And we'll make sure we send out Sarah's contact information as well. So until then, thank you so much. I just saw a question come in, Denise. There is a schedule. I will throw that in the chat box there as well. We have these scheduled through December, so I'll put that whole thing in there for you. So you can find that all there. Thank you all so much for your time. Sarah, John, thank you. You are a wealth of information. I know I took away a lot of good stuff and have some things that I was nodding my head along with saying, yep. So, all right, everyone, we will hopefully see you back here on the 30th. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Look forward to learning next time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.